Thanks, y'all. Eric, here we go. So I get that all the time. I walk into work in the mornings and it's standing ovation, company meeting, so that really is not that special. Y'all are awesome. So it's Wednesday, so guess what that means? It means y'all are tired. It's been a long week, hasn't it? Yeah, I know you guys go from morning until night, and there's lots of things going on, so this is your second to last full day on the mountain, and so I know you're tired. But guess what? I am too. 2019 was the longest year of my career. I worked really hard during the holiday. We just came off of a vacation, which was awesome, but it wasn't one of those relaxing vacations. It was one of those work hard vacations where we were tubing and snowmobiling and staying up late. So I'm with you guys. We're in the same spot. Rick mentioned that this is the session right before lunch, which is the favorite session for any speaker to have, because the only thing in between you and lunch is me. So the only thing worse is having the last session in the afternoon, which means that that person's the only thing between you and lunch or happy hour for a lot of speakers. So we got that going for us. But here's my commitment. My commitment is to give you my best 50 minutes over the next 50 minutes. And hopefully there's going to be something there that you can take away. That's my prayer. I will tell you, here's my assignment. It's always the same assignment. Every single year, I ask Rick, what's the topic that you want me to talk about? And this is always what he says. He says, what would you want to tell your 21-year-old self? In other words, what would I like for you guys to hear that I wish that I would have heard if I was sitting in those same chairs? The true answer is that I wish I would have had Summit, because in 1984, which is probably the year I would have gone to Summit, they didn't have such a thing. I loved my COBA. It was awesome. Had a great ACU experience. But we didn't have Summit. And we didn't have the kind of COBA and a dean and professors that poured into me like you guys get poured into. So you're blessed. I hope, just like Janine said, you appreciate the blessings that you have with people who love you and care for you and are pouring into you the way that they are. The problem with this kind of assignment is, if I was going to go tell my 21-year-old self something that was really important, it's probably going to be something that I would like to avoid later in life. You can learn all kinds of lessons in a classroom, reading books, listening to people lecture. You're going to learn lessons in hands-on training and all the things that you're doing. But sometimes you learn lessons the hard way. The ring up there says School of Hard Knocks. And sometimes you learn lessons the way that life delivers them to you. And so that kind of assignment means that if I'm going to be honest, if I'm going to be authentic with you guys, I'm going to have to tell you a lesson that I learned the hard way. And so that's going to happen in this. I'm going to tell you a story that is a story that I don't like to tell. And I only tell it up here, except for one time that I've told this story to my church family this year. It was the first time I've ever told this story outside of being on the mountain. So you're going to hear something that most people don't hear. And there's a reason I don't like to tell the story. So if you go and looked at my LinkedIn page, which I'm really not a big fan of LinkedIn, a lot of social media venues like LinkedIn are places where people really sort of overemphasize all the good stuff, and you never see anything about the bad stuff. And that's going to be true with mine. You're going to see the accomplishments and the things that I've done. But a lot of times you see a lot of stuff that just isn't true, right? And so we tend to create personas that aren't really who we are. But if you went and looked at my LinkedIn, you would see some things about my professional accomplishments. My personal life is frankly more important to me, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am a graduate of ACU 1986, COBA. I graduated with an IS degree. They called it ISQS back then, and so I have an IS degree. I'm married to my wife, Crystal, class of 87. We got married in 1986. I have 4 wonderful children. My oldest, Lyndon, my middle, Matt. I'm sure Matt really appreciated the fact that he got named the oldest, but he's the middle. And my youngest, Jackson. So Lyndon's class of 12, Matt's class of 16. And Jackson's going to be class of 21, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah. No. Class of 21. And I have a daughter whom I love. We had to import her into the family. And so we finally got a girl, and she's one that we love, and she's precious to us. Mentioned that shepherd for the Church of Christ on McDermott Road, which is an awesome job, love it. Got the ACU Distinguished Alumni Award in 2012, which was a fantastic honor So lots of great things associated with ACU. Love ACU. And then if you look at the LinkedIn, you'll see that I started 3 different businesses. I started one called Centurion Systems, which was named after my social club at the time. Started that in 1985 while I was at ACU. My motive was very simple. I needed to pay for my education, and I wanted to get married to Crystal, so I needed a job. And I was pretty good at programming, and so I chose to start a business where I could help other businesses by programming on their computers. And so I did that the last 2.5 years I was at ACU. I actually hired 2 of my friends that were part of my social club, and so they worked for me as my employees while I was there, which was pretty cool. One of the blessings you guys have that I hope that you take advantage of is that you've got something on campus called the Lytle Center, which encourages you to think about entrepreneurialism and philanthropy and gives you an opportunity to do some of those things while you're on campus. We didn't really have that, so I was kind of doing it on the fly, making it up as I went, but I had a great opportunity to do that. I moved back to Dallas. That really grew into a company called Integration Services, which I started in 1989. And then I started a company called Design Technologies in 94, which I sold to PFSWeb in 99. And so that's the entrepreneurial side of it. And since then, I've worked for PFSWeb, initially as the VP of e-commerce, and then as the CIO, and then the president of our PFS division, and the president of the entire company in 2010, and the CEO in 2013. So if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, you're going to see stuff about all of that. What you may notice is that there's 2 companies up there, Integration Services and Design Technology. Why did I start one in 89 and then start another one in 94? And that's where the story comes in. Because in September of 1994, I got a mulligan. Who knows what a mulligan is? What's a mulligan? There it is. It's a golf term. So if you're playing golf and you're with friends, this is not official rules, there's no such thing in official rule golf, but if you're playing golf with your friends and you hit it off in the rough and it's a bad shot, your friends may say, take a mulligan, which means you can grab that ball and put it in the fairway, or you just hit it again and take a different shot, right? So it's a do-over. So I got a do-over in September of 1994. There's a book that a guy named Tim Irwin wrote. He's a member of the CEO Forum, friend of Rick's and a friend of mine. And it's called Derailed. And his timing's interesting because he wrote this book, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And he would, if he wrote it today, would have so much more material because there's so many public derailings that have happened. But this book is fascinating because it talks about how many different situations there have been over the years where you have a business leader who, because of the way that they act and operate and the way their character is formed, they end up derailed. And over the past 2 years, we've just seen over and over and over all of these derailings that have happened. And so Tim says that in his book, the purpose of writing the book is to shed intense light on our vulnerabilities, the irregularities, the small cracks and fissures that can cause us to derail, whether we're leaders, emerging leaders, or simply navigating a career. And he says that if you're going to be watching out for times when you could get derailed as a leader, here are 5 different things that you should be looking for, right? First off, character trumps competence. And this is true. You can be the smartest person in the world. If your character is flawed, you're probably off to a bad start. Arrogance is the mother of all derailers. If you think you are above it all, and are not accountable to the rules everybody else plays by, you're going to be in a big problem. This is a big one. Lack of self or other awareness is a common denominator in all derailments. Not being aware of who you are and not being aware of who everybody else is around you is a common denominator. We are always who we are, especially under stress. So who you are at the core is going to show up every single day when you go to work, but it's going to show up most often when you're under stress. And here's the hopeful statement in all of this. Derailment is not inevitable, but without attention to development, without being intentional about your character, it probably is inevitable. So, Integration Services, the company that I started in 1989, was a contract programming firm. We built a business around helping businesses to program their computer systems. And we started to have a niche helping businesses to solve the Y2K problem, which you probably don't even know what that is. Some of you weren't even born in the year 2000. But a lot of old computer systems didn't properly store the year in a date. They just used a 2-digit year. And so the problem is, in the 90s, people started to realize that what does 00 mean? Does it mean 1900 or does it mean 2000? You could probably intuit that it means 2000, but what does 50 mean? Does that mean 1950 or does it mean 2050? So it was a big problem, and so a lot of people made a lot of money coming in to help businesses see if they had a problem, and if they did, how do you go about fixing the problem? We started to build a nice little business on this. By 1994, we had grown from the 4 people that we started with to 50 people that were teammates in the company. In 1994, we were looking to probably make about $8 million in revenue that year from this company that we started in 1989, which back in 94, that was real money. That's a lot. And so we had a lot of success. We were doing some really great things. I was enjoying myself. But it made me really uncomfortable to think about building a whole business around this thing that I thought was going to disappear in the year 2000. Once you'd fixed the problem, what's next? And so I argued with my partners about the direction of the company. I talked about my vision for where I thought we should be headed, and the way in which I worked through that with them. I started to talk to one person about this and another person about that. And as I look back on it, realized that the way that I tried to steer the company was damaging to the company and to the relationships that I had. I remember this one specific date, Monday, September 26th, 1994. We had just moved from this little office that we started out with. We started out in this 1,200 square foot office with all 4 of us jammed into one little office. We'd steadily expanded that in the space that we were in. We got big enough where we thought we could move sort of uptown, and so we moved out to an office in Las Colinas in the Dallas area, a big skyrise, Lytle Center was what it was called at the time. Outside of my office, I could see the statue of the horses running through William Square in Las Colinas, if you're familiar with it. And we were on the 5th floor, which had the highest ceilings, because that's where the monorail came through the Xerox tower. So when our office, we had a 24-foot ceiling. So it was a really nice space, and we moved into that space. And we'd been in there three weeks or so. And I had ordered a bunch of expensive office furniture for my corner president's office. And so it finally arrived, and I remember walking in on that Monday, and all my office furniture's there, and I'm looking out of this window on William Square, and I thought to myself, this is what it feels like to have arrived. Did you hear that? This is what it feels like to have arrived. I've got the corner office. I've got 50 people working for me. We're going to make $8 million this year, right? This is what it feels like to arrive. Thursday, September 29th, 1994, 3 days later. I walk into a conference room, there's an ad hoc meeting, and I sit down and I look, and there's the 5 business partners that I have. And we sit down and I say, hey, what's going on? What's the meeting about? They start passing papers around the conference table, signing them. And I get the paper, and it says, motion to dismiss the president. And I watched these papers come by and realized that my business partners are firing me from my job. And I realized I deserved it. I had been a bully. I had tried to work my agenda through my business partners. My motives were probably pretty good, but as I reflected on what they were doing, it came to me that that's actually what I deserved in that moment. God was very gracious to me. A week later, a friend of mine that had been a client called me up and said, we've got this big problem, really like to have you come work with us on the problem. And I heard from Steve, one of your former business partners, that you were available. So I'd like for you to come work with us. You hear that? One of the guys who signed the papers to fire me actually called up this friend to say, you should call Mike because he's available. So I found myself as just Mike, sitting in front of a computer, working on a keyboard. They didn't have an office for me to sit in, so I had to sit in the computer room where the computer equipment is, which they keep at about 65 degrees. So I'm in a coat with gloves on. That's the only spot that they had. But they paired me up with a man named Roy, who I didn't know really well, but I knew pretty well. And we sat there for a year, and we worked on this project, which was super fun. And I learned a new programming language. But Roy and I sat there and talked, and Roy's a Christian man. And we talked about the things that had happened, and we talked about Jesus, and we talked about healing and grace. And over that next year, I healed, and I felt God's grace. And that one-man show, I filed a C Corp, started Design Technologies, and started to gather people around me again and built that company up in a totally different way. And that's the company that I sold to PFS in 1999. So let me see if I forgot anything. The lesson that I'm going to share with you for the rest of the time that we have is the lesson that I learned coming out of that experience. That school of hard knocks reality check that is that point on Tim Irwin's book. That my lack of self-awareness and my lack of others' awareness was, in fact, the cause of my derailment. I wasn't thinking about the people I was working with in the right way. I wasn't treating them in the right way. And I wasn't even really thinking about the person that I was. In fact, that evening when I went home and I had to tell Crystal what had happened, the thought sort of kept running through my mind, do I even know who I am? What's going on? This was such a jarring thing that it just shook my whole world and started me thinking, do I even know who I am? So the first lesson is, and this is Peter Drucker, so it's not like anything I made up. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the best strategy in the world, and if your culture is corrupt, it's probably going to fail. The flip side of that is, interestingly, also true, which is that you can have a mediocre strategy and an awesome corporate culture, and you're probably going to be successful. Culture is the most important thing. And I had not built that first company, Integration Services, with a good culture, with the right culture. I wasn't even thinking about culture. And so as I thought about what had happened to me and the mistakes that I'd made, I started thinking about what does good company culture look like? And you know what? The Bible has a lot to say about company culture, interestingly enough. I know you guys hear the word salt and light a lot. You probably hear it in classrooms. I know you hear it from Dr. Schubert. You're supposed to go out and be salt and light. And you probably heard some things about what that might mean. What is salt? What is light? How does that apply? You may have heard lessons or sermons about that, right? But this is from Jesus. Jesus says to all of us, this is from his Sermon on the Mount, where he's talking to his disciples and probably thousands of other people on that mountain. And he said to them, you are the salt of the earth. And then he proceeds on and says, you are the light of the world. And so what does that mean? What does it mean to be salt and light? And you might have heard lessons that talked about salt's a preservative or salt's a flavor. It brings out the other flavors in the food that you're putting in. Light obviously illuminates, tells you what is true and what is not, makes things that were hidden not hidden any longer. But I think it also has application to a corporate culture if you're thinking about building a good corporate culture. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I think light is how I think about others, right? Light's not a substance, right? It provides illumination. It's not something you can put your hands on, but you sure know when you have it and when you don't. And so I think that there's a passage in Ephesians that we can take a look at and draw some lessons out of very quickly that talk about what does salt and light look like in a corporate culture as a leader in a corporate culture, okay? And here's the passage, and I'm going to read it. It's verse 1 and verse 3. It says, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. So the first point is that we're called. Jesus said it directly to us. You are salt, you are light. It's a calling. Bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So I think light in the workplace looks like two things, right? First, we want to walk in a manner worthy of the calling that we have. Second, we're going to bear with one another in love. We're going to talk about that in some detail. And we want to have unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So a good corporate workplace that has light in it is going to have love, and it's going to have unity. And when you think about love, when you think about it vertically, because the source of love is God, right? In fact, Jesus helps us with this point because it's every Christian person's prime directive. When Jesus was asked, what's the most important thing, if you're going to focus on one thing, what's the most important thing you should do? And he said, look, there's two things. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else hangs on that, right? Everything else is attached to that. So love is vertical because God's love for us, our love for him, then affects the horizontal, which is how do we live with each other in community, okay? And we should all recognize how much God loves us because he was willing to send his son and die for us, right? And he calls us to have the same kind of sacrificial love for each other, which is an amazing and huge challenge. So let's break that down a little bit. It's so important, this commandment that we love each other, that this little piece of information is in the first chapter of the first book in the Bible. If you just pick it out, start in Genesis chapter 1, you're going to see this information. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Okay? Every human being walking the planet has a piece of God inside of them. All of you sitting here today are image bearers of God. In your soul, you carry a piece of God. And the first thing to understand is how special we all are because God created us in that way, that he embedded a piece of him in us. What amazing love he has for us to create us in his image. Okay? And understanding that as a starting point is so critical because you do have to love yourself and understand how special you are before you're going to be able to turn around and share that with other people, right? That's why Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And when you understand how special you are that God created you in his image, then you know God created you to be special and unique. But that also calls us to think differently about other people. This is from 2 Corinthians 5. An amazing chapter, by the way. Go read all of chapter 5 sometime. It's fantastic. But here's what Paul says. He says, for the love of Christ controls us because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. Okay? Jesus died for all of you and for all of us, and therefore we are amazing and special. And here's the so what, here's the therefore. Therefore, from now on, we regard no one according to the flesh. This is the hardest thing in the world for us to do, which is to realize that in every one of our human interactions, we're interacting with somebody who's made in God's image and is special. And it should change the way that we think and look at other people. It changes it in the workplace. It changes it in all your personal interactions. It changes it at church. When you see somebody who's a human being and you look at them with the same kind of eyes that God would look at them. And you all know that in our best days, we're very poor at being image bearers for God. And in our worst days, we're really bad at it, and we often look more like image bearers of our adversary than we do of our Creator God. But what we're called to do as believers is to change the way that we look at people and look at them the way that God does, which is made in his image. And when you start to do that and you actually act from love and you think differently, it starts to affect the way that you interact with other people. And when you're dealing with somebody who's especially difficult, which we all do all the time, and you step back and you think, this person is somebody who God loves and gave his son for, and has embedded a piece of himself. As difficult as they are right now, I need to think of them in that way. So what should that look like? The passage that we looked at said it should look like unity. So one thing that's true that I've learned is that we were all built for community. And that first experience I had in building a company, I didn't build to have sustainable community. I built it for my own gratification, to be completely honest with you. I built it because it was firing my ambitions and it was making me feel good and feel successful. But I was using other people to accomplish my objectives rather than thinking about what was best for them and how to elevate them within the community. I was being selfish. So one of the lessons that I learned is that love in the workplace looks like community in unity, okay? Still, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. It says, all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us a ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. That's an amazing statement, isn't it? First off, the knowledge that all of my trespasses, all of my mistakes up to this very moment, and all of yours are completely forgiven because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And that God has asked us to partner with him in being ambassadors in the workplace, in the church, everywhere you find yourself. And I'll tell you something that you may find a little disappointing. But when you leave ACU and you go out to whatever workplace you're going to go into, I don't care whether it's a corporate workplace, a nonprofit, a for-profit, a scientific organization, a church, maybe especially the church, you're going to find more people who are oriented around disunity and destruction than you're going to find who are interested in consensus and community and unity. So you being an ambassador for reconciliation is one of the most powerful callings that you can have. If you go into a workplace and you set about the job of reconciling people and bringing people together who are not getting along for a common goal, you will be an asset to your organization. You will be doing God's work. And I want to know who you are so I can hire you to work for my company. Because you are a special asset when you work for a company as a reconciler. It's an uphill battle, unfortunately. And I've seen it in my company, I've seen it in the clients that we serve, that there are far more people trying to tear things down than there are trying to build them up. And you either want to reconcile that, you want to heal that, or you want to get that out of your organization. But reconcilers are amazing people. So let's talk about salt. If light has that illumination, if it's not a substance you can put your hands on, salt certainly is. It's substantial. It's meant to do something. So in my opinion, salt in a workplace is about how I behave, how I act towards others. Light is more theoretical. Salt's very practical. So let's talk about practically what we do in the workplace to be salt in the workplace. Still in Ephesians 4, our passage, right? First off, what do I think inwardly? Called with all humility. How do I act outwardly? With gentleness. And then how do I think about the future? With patience. These are the three elements of salt I think about in the workplace. So let's dive into those a little bit with a little bit of scripture for each one. C.S. Lewis said, humility is not thinking of yourself less, thinking less of yourself, but is thinking of yourself less, right? So humility is not thinking of yourself in a sort of self-deprecating way, thinking you're not special, deflecting somebody who gives you praise. Humility is not self-deprecation. Humility is understanding your place in the world and thinking about others more than you think about yourself, and ultimately understanding that you were created to live in community, and you're created by a magnificent, all-powerful God, and you were gifted in a certain way to be able to accomplish things for Him, right? So as soon as you put yourself in the center of your universe, and you think about yourself all the time, and you think about others less, you're actually doing the bidding of our adversary, versus what God wants you to do, right? Which is to be humble. Here's this awesome passage in Romans 12. Ephesians 4 also has a really great one. So we could stay in Ephesians 4, but it's really long. And so I took this one from Romans. Paul says, "For by the grace given to me, I say that everyone among you not think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned him." And this is really important. "For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function, so we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another." You need to understand your giftedness, your capabilities, how God built you, to understand how you're going to fit into your organization that you're serving, and to be complementary to those around you. Because every organization has different things that have to be done, and you're being equipped and we're created to do something specific. That's your calling, and you're figuring it out now. And it may change once you get into the workplace and you find other things that you like to do and that you're gifted at and that you can contribute. But it's important for me to walk into my workplace every single day and realize that if it weren't for the 2,500 employees working for PFSWeb, I would have nothing to do. Literally, nothing to do. Because as a CEO, what I'm doing is making decisions, resolving conflicts, thinking about how to take the company forward with the assets that we have and the employees that are there to work. And none of our clients would get served, no phone calls would get answered, no boxes would get shipped, no websites would get designed, implemented without everybody else. And so I would come into the office and sit in front of a blank desk with nothing to do. So I'm about as useless as there is, an employee as there is in the company without everyone else in the company. We need to understand our place in the world and understand how valuable our place in the world is. And if somebody comes up to you and says, "Good job, you did a great job," say thank you. Don't say, I think I probably could have done better. And that's not humility, that's self-deprecation. Be happy about the contribution that you make. That's an attitude, and it's inward, but it is a behavior because it's going to affect how you are around others. The next one is gentleness. What's the opposite of gentle? What? Aggressive, harsh, mean-spirited. So a lot of people, there's a similar word called meek. Gentle and meek, sometimes you hear those two things go together. And I think there's a misconception in our world that a gentle person or a meek person is a pushover, right? Like that's somebody you can just roll over. If you're going to want to get your way, they're probably just going to roll over and do that. It doesn't mean that at all. You can be gentle, meek, and still be direct, honest, even critical, as long as it's constructively critical. But back to that point of seeing people for who they are, for seeing them as the people that God made them to be, your approach to them is going to be gentle because you're looking after their best interest. If you love them, the kind of love the Bible's talking about, you want what's best for them. And so even when you're critical, you're going to be doing that in a way that's gentle, right? Which means your delivery is going to be different, but most important, your objective is different because what you're going to be doing is to give them constructive criticism or direction or whatever you're doing in a way that is in their best interest, right? How do I help them to accomplish their objectives? So here's a couple of passages. "Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." The way that you interact with people actually reflects on your testimony as a believer. If you're not gentle with somebody, what are they going to think about you as a believer? Here's another one. 1 Peter 3. You always need to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that's in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. You want to be the kind of person in the workplace where people ask you, why do you act that way? How can you handle that meeting the way that you handled it? What's the reason for the way that you're able to persevere through this horrible situation that we're in? Whatever it is, right? And then you can say to them, look, the reason is because of my faith. It just changes the way that I think about myself and everybody else. But do it in a way that is gentle, right? Because you could certainly pick up the Bible and hit them right over the head and respond in a way that's not. But you don't want to do that, right? Workplace ministry should not be arrogant or harsh. And if you want to read a good chapter for this, 1 Corinthians 13 is a great one because it talks about love and how we ought to be towards each other. And the last one is patience. What's the opposite of patience? Don't say impatience, that's easy. What's the opposite of patience? Sorry? Short-tempered? Hasty? I would tell you that I think the opposite of patience is anxious. If you are anxious and filled with anxiety, you can't be patient. Patient doesn't mean that you're inactive or passive or that you're waiting for something to happen. It means you have an attitude that's not anxious. It means that you realize that you have this moment, maybe this day, and you've been equipped with enough to take care of this day, and that everything that's going to happen after is really outside your control, and you're going to be okay with that. And you're not going to get wrapped around the axle, as you see in that little visual up there, by anxiety. That's actually a decal off of a tractor that says if you get too close to a PTO shaft, it's going to turn you into a pretzel. That's what anxiety does. Anxiety will turn you into a pretzel and make you inactive, and then you become passive because you can't move forward with confidence. So if you're anxious, then here's a good passage for you, right? It's just a reminder that James gives to all of us that says before you make a bunch of plans and before you're arrogant enough to think that all of your plans are going to happen just like you planned them out, you should be thinking that you don't know what tomorrow will bring. You ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. Some people take this literally and they say, Lord willing, before everything that they say after that. This is an attitude. It doesn't have to be said. The attitude is, look, if this falls within God's plan, if the things that I want to do are in accordance with His will, then it's going to happen. It doesn't say, don't make plans for the future, right? It doesn't say, I intend to go into such and such a town and do this or that, but it says do it with an attitude that if it's in according to God's will. And then as things roll out, you're not going to get wrapped around the axle when your plans don't fall out just like you thought that they would, because that happens all the time. Okay? So, if you're thinking about salt and light in the workplace, it starts with love. You can't get anywhere without understanding God loves you. You should love Him. Love your neighbors as yourself. Understand your own value when you do that. Look for unity. Live in community. Look out for other people's best interest, knowing that they're made in the image of God, just like you are. Be humble, which is knowing your place in the world and that you're part of an organization and how you fit into that and contribute as you're gifted. Do that with gentleness as you deal with each individual that you come across. And then be patient and let your future unroll in front of you the way that God intends. And don't get wrapped around the axle with anxiety. And why is it important in a corporate setting? Because here's this word that we use in a corporate setting. It's called synergy. It's a big word for 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 2. That people coming together can create more value together than they can independently. And it's absolutely 100% true. Every corporation on the planet is looking for synergy. They're looking to bring people together to create more value than could be created by any of those individuals on their own. Here's dictionary.com. The interaction of elements that, when combined, produce a total effect that's greater than the sum of the individual elements, contributions, etc. That's just a dictionary definition for a organization working well together in community using these principles is going to create that kind of synergy. That's what I want in my workplace. I want people working together, looking after each other's best interest. How do I help you be successful? How can you help me be successful? Together, we're going to go do things that we could not do individually. Okay? And then the last thing that I'll leave you with is, how do I know that it's working? One way is that my partners don't fire me. So that's the good sign, right? I'm the CEO of a public company, which means every single day my job's on the line. What we do within our company either has to please the shareholders or not please the shareholders, and sometimes decision I might make could affect that. It could be something completely outside my control, and I'm okay with that. And you have to be if you're going to be the CEO of a public company, because you serve completely at the to the shareholders and to the board, right? But I do have to have a dashboard that tells me, am I being somebody who's creating a culture, who's helping contribute to a culture that has salt and light? And so there are these little touch points. I have people who I've empowered to come to me and speak the truth, especially when I'm not doing the things I should do, right? I've got accountability partners within the company who know they can come and say, that maybe you didn't handle that all that well. I look for the signs, where I see a team that's working well together or a team that's not, that's dysfunctional. And so what do we need to do as a management team to go into that situation and try to bring unity and healing and to deal with things that happen? We use instruments, sort of work trait assessments to find out how people are talented and how they're gifted. And so where should we be trying to help them be successful? Or maybe there's some area where somebody's really, swimming upstream because it's an area that they're not gifted, right? All kinds of things that we can do. One thing that happens every year this year, and I did this same talk last summit and used a similar example, a different one. In our company, our management team goes into the operation during the holiday period. It's our Super Bowl as a company. A lot of our clients are retailers, and so they're selling as much as 30-40% of their annual sales in that 2-month period of November and December. And so it creates for us just a crazy environment. We ramp up, we double our workforce in all of our warehouse facilities and our call centers, and we go and we run the company at 150 miles an hour. And so one of the things that we do as a senior executive team is we go out into the operation and we work in a warehouse or a call center alongside all of our people that are doing these jobs in order to encourage them, in order to have some influence, in order to see what's going on in case there's something that needs to be addressed next year, and frankly just to have a presence. And so after the holiday's over, and so that's why I'm tired, by the way. I spent a week in Memphis doing 14-hour shifts every single day, packing boxes and sending them out the door. And then I flew over to Southampton in our brand new UK facility and did that for a week there because we had a client that was 130% over their forecast in that facility. And so we were doing everything we had to do in order to get all of their orders out the door. After all that's done, after all the insanity, members of my team nominate holiday heroes, people that they saw within the operation, and in most cases, people that aren't in a management position. They're people that are working in a position, packing a box or answering a phone, where they saw them going above and beyond the call of duty in a certain situation. So this year I had 50 of those. So I wrote personal emails to all 50 of those, right? Several of them went to people that are in that UK facility, that brand new facility with the client that blew their forecast away, and they had to do real heroics. So here's the email that I got back from this individual. I told her what a fantastic job she did. She's a project manager. She's not hired to work on a warehouse floor. But I saw her do her project management job and then do a night shift 4 days in a row, just packing boxes like the rest of us were doing. So she did two jobs at the same time. Here's her response to me. Thank you for the note, but this middle second paragraph is the one that I feel incredibly fortunate to be part of such an inspirational team. Not only the UK team, but the PFSW global team. I spoke with a member of a temp staff during December, and they were all astounded when they found out who you were. They noted that they had seen you and Joe, who's one of our vice presidents, making carts, making chairs, making carts, the Pandora boxes, and commented that they'd never worked in a company where the senior managers worked alongside the staff on the ground. It was a very proud moment for me to explain that at every PFS distribution center, this is the norm, and an encounter that I will never forget. The impact that it had on temp staff, those who do not automatically come with loyalty, was enormous and assisted in our overall success. I will be taking many lessons forward into 2020, but this one is significant. So, it's working. When you get feedback like that, you know that it made a difference for somebody who simply noticed that you're willing to serve, you're willing to go pack boxes alongside everybody else. It makes a difference. So look for those things in your life. What information is coming back to you to say that you're having an impact on people, that you're meeting their needs, that you're loving them like the people that God created them to be, and you'll get that feedback just like I do every year this time of year. So I think that next time I do a summit talk, it probably won't be this one because 2019 has been a really interesting year. So Rick, when I ask you what the assignment is, you might say trust because I have a feeling it's probably going to be that. Thank you for the opportunity.